hello everyone. I'm here again with my colleague Leonora that did the New Field program with me. And she's been working in some other exciting tools and assessments about us, about how we show up, what kind of professionals, what kind of human beings we are. So today is going to be a review session, and I will let Leonora explain what is this about, this predictive index. So Leonora, passing the ball to you.
Daniel, thank you so much. And it's so much fun to be in this setting with you. Being in coaching school with you is a real honor and privilege, and I'm thrilled that our friendship has carried outside of that because you're someone who shares the values of doing really good work with people. When we look at your assessment, we'll start to get under the hood of why it is that you care so much about that, but that's for later. So as you said, I work with a predictive index. It's a behavioral assessment that is given in about 80 countries around the world. There are over 3 million of these given a year. And they're given in, they've been given since 1955. So it's a tried and true assessment. It's been being given for a long time. And it can give us a lot of really valuable information about how people show up as individuals, and extremely relevant for teams, how people show up in the workplace, which is the focus of my work. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about yourself. I like to tell people I'm going to introduce them to themselves and I read these results. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're looking at. Does that sound okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to just, let's see, make it so you can see on your screen. You should be able to see 3 graphs. And the first one says self, the second one says self-concept, and the third says synthesis. Can you see all of those?
Yes.
Okay. If you had a printout in front of you, Daniel, I would say by the graph that says self, write DNA. This is how you came wired to the world. And if you were to take this in another 20 years, it's unlikely that the results would change materially. Down below it, you have a graph that says self-concept. And this measures the way that your work environment is asking you to flex or adapt in ways that may be natural or unnatural to you. So while the self graph is good over time, and if you took it in 20 years from now, it would be the same, the self concept is valid for about 90 to 120 days. And so if we were looking at this same report in 6 months from now, I would be skeptical about the validity of this one. This is sort of a snapshot in time. And finally, down at the bottom, you have what's called the synthesis. It's the mathematical marriage of the 2 graphs above it. So this is who would likely show up in an interview, but it doesn't tell me as much as the self graph or the self concept, because I don't know kind of how the sausage was made to get to this particular outcome. So those are the 3 graphs on the page. If you break it down and look at each graph, you'll see that there's a black triangle that represents a midpoint. We measure 3 sigmas to the right and 3 sigmas to the left. And then we measure down to 1/5 of a sigma in these blue hash marks on the bottom. The reason for that is once these letters, or sometimes I call them vitamins, start moving around the page, small swings can have really material differences in how people present. Anything to the right of the midpoint is considered high, and anything is considered low. And high and low are not good or bad. Really, what they are is expressions of certain drives that you have as a human being that translate into needs and lead to behaviors that you engage in to get those needs met. And so high or low isn't good or bad, but it's sort of a spectrum. And the further away you get from the midpoint in either direction, the more the volume is turned up on a certain tendency that you may have. So that's how we read the charts. So then what are we measuring with these vitamins and their distances from the midpoint? So before we talk about that, I think it's important to say what we're not measuring. This is not a cognitive test, so it's not measuring IQ. Predictive Index has a product that measures that, but it's not this. It doesn't measure skills, education, experience, any of those things. It really looks only at 5 basic drives that you have as a human, the needs that those create, and how that shows up in behavior. And with that information, it gives us a great ability to predict if you're going to be successful in a role and if you're going to do that role with high levels of satisfaction for long periods of time. So that's it. And it is really important to be clear on what we're not versus what we are measuring. So in terms of measuring your behavioral tendencies and how you show up, we look at that along 5 different channels. So PI has language and I have language. So I'm going to offer you both. This A, Predictive Index, calls the drive for dominance. I actually call it your idea channel. So how do you generate and how do you value ideas? This B drive is, in Predictive Index world, the drive for extroversion. I call it your communication channel. So how do you communicate? But more importantly, Daniel, how do you like to be communicated with? That can be really important in organizations when you have teams who have to work together. To give them some data about how others like to be communicated with can be very powerful. We'll get to that in a second. This C drive is what Predictive Index calls the drive for patience. I call it your work environment channel. So what is the type of work environment that's going to allow you to bring your A game every single day? And then we have this D drive, which Predictive Index calls your drive for formality. I call it your decision-making channel. So how much data do you need to make a decision? And once you have that data, then we go down to this E right here and say, once you have that data, are you more likely to make your decision with your heart or your head? And that's your intuition channel.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at those 5 things, we actually have a kind of crazy ability to paint a picture of a human being in front of us, even if we don't know them. So before I dive into your results, any questions about how the charts work and what we're measuring and what we're not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thanks for that, Leonora. So just the difference between the self and the self-concept. So self is basically who I am, and self-concept is how do I see myself, or how do others see myself?
No, self-concept is how you feel you need to show up at work.
Ah, okay. At work. Okay.
Yeah, it's the way you experience the demands of your workplace as being aligned with who you are or not aligned with who you are.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So this is very interesting because at least A and B, they are very similar, right? Within the self and the self-concept.
Yep, and we're going to get into all of that. Actually, you have much more alignment between yourself and self-concept than the majority of patterns that I see. But I'm going to tell you, when I tell you about your results, where I see that you may be stretched in a certain way. So you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I look at your profile, the headline that comes out for me is that you're the epitome of a team player and people person, and you've been that way your entire life. So when you're working on a team, you're really concerned with coming up with the right idea, and you're not really attached to whether it's your idea or someone else's idea. You just want the best idea. You enjoy working in environments with a lot of harmony, and I would say that you might even shy away from competition or conflict. If you have to engage in those things, because that can be part of business, you can do it. But your happiest place is working with a lot of harmony. So for example, I imagine Newfield, where we forged a lot of human relationships and worked together in great support, was a very natural environment for you. You are naturally a people person, so I think you process the world by communicating in it. If you and I are working together, you're going to be one of the first people that I come grab into a brainstorming session, because you're going to feel really comfortable surfacing ideas that are in process. You're going to be really comfortable expressing what you think. And you're going to have a wonderful ability to read the room and see what other people are feeling and how they're experiencing whatever's happening. You've probably, for much of your life, been described as like the nicest guy someone knows, or the guy that makes order out of chaos, or the calm spot in a stormy work environment. So you've got a natural patience, and with that often comes a tremendous unifocus. So if you're focused on something, you get head in it all the way. It can probably be hard for you to be pulled off something you're in the middle of and then come back to it. So when you think about how you prioritize your work, my guess is that you might have a list of tasks and you're going to spend time thinking about what the priority is. And then you're going to prefer to finish one before you move on to two, and probably not want to move on to three until two is done. Which is in contrast to a lot of people in the business world who take tremendous pride in being multitaskers. And if you give them a list of 10 things, they start 2, 6, and 8 at once, and they've got 7 books on their bedside table that they're in the middle of. My guess is that you work with a lot of those people, but that's not your natural happy place. And as such, when it comes to initiatives in the workplace, like implementing change or creating processes, that you're someone that people turn to because you're a natural order out of chaos person. Interestingly, and this can sometimes conflict a little bit with that, and I'll just say as a personal note, I live in this world also, you don't have a huge interest in minute details of things. And if you and I were working together, one of the first things that I would make sure of is that you had an admin assistant, because you're not at your highest and best use when you're being asked to, say, read through the details of a contract or reconcile accounting books. You know, that sort of formal type of work just is less of a fit with who you are than reading a room full of people and knowing how to get everyone comfortable right away. That said, if it's something that you're really interested in the details about, you're going to go deep in it and make sure that the process that supports those details is right. But at the end of the day, it would probably be your worst nightmare to be an accountant or to be a lawyer reviewing contracts, because that type of solo work down in the details isn't your thing. I'm going to guess in your home life, if you buy a new piece of equipment and you get an owner's manual, you might look at the front page insert that has the pictures of how to do it, but it's unlikely that you're going to crack the manual itself and read it page to page. So
absolutely.
So a couple of other things that I see here is that you're very people oriented over being task oriented. So if there's something that needs to get done, yes, of course you're going to do it. You wouldn't be where you are in your career if you didn't have that ability. But you are acutely aware of the interactions that you're having with people along the way and the impact on people, and that's always front of mind for you. And probably you have a tendency to make your decisions more subjectively, so that you're probably more concerned with looking out for the human relationships than necessarily that things are done exactly the way they're supposed to be done. By that same token, you also have a very healthy skepticism for someone telling you that they should do something some way because that's how it's always been done. For you, rules are more suggestions, and you're really interested in figuring out ways to make things function better. So if that means you have to change the rules, change the rules. And it's not that you're a rebel, but you're really interested in kind of how things can work best, and precedent for you is just not interesting. And so the gift in that is that it makes you a wonderful innovator in thinking up new processes for how things can work, and then you have the patience to actually implement them. The bad news is that if someone comes to you and says, Daniel, you have to do things this way, you can pretty quickly feel like you're being micromanaged and not enjoy that experience. So if I were working with you, I would give you tremendous flexibility in how you approached your work, but I would be clear with what the deliverables were that I expected, so that you weren't spending a lot of time innovating and coming up with new processes around something that wasn't actually needed. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that you have a very natural ability to respond to things around you. So when it comes to change, what I can say that your relationship probably is that you're don't fix it person. You're not the kind of person who's out like starting fires just for the joy of putting them out. But you're the first to pick up on when something is happening around you, and then working sometimes on your own and sometimes through others to figure out how to address it, which comes back to where I started, which is that you really are a quintessential team player and people person. And your leadership style is always going to be one of bringing people along with you, listening to what everyone has to say, and having no issue delegating authority to people when they want to take it on, and no issue delegating details to people if they want to take them on. So you're always going to be, you know, if I had to describe your leadership style based on this, you're the kind of leader who's accessible to the people who work with him, really interested in listening to all ideas, probably not indecisive about what ideas to take. And the place where you may sometimes get hung up is when there's conflict around you. That's probably not very comfortable to you because you can instinctively feel that people are suffering in that and you don't like that. So that's what I see when I read your pattern. Now let's talk about the ways that your work, well, first of all, let me ask if that sounds accurate.
Yeah, it sounds basically that you have a hidden camera, you know, in my life, in my mind, in who I am for the last 38 years. Huh? My God, that was really precise, you know, described pretty much everything. I think it's fantastic. Wow.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So the description of those things, the details, the level of details you bring, it's impressive and really like how I lead my team. The fact that I definitely I don't like details, you know, I'm not a detailed person oriented. So I like to empower my team to go over the details, and if they need my help, I can go there. The example on the manual, like you buy new things, I usually throw away the user manual.
Yeah,
I go to a 2 minutes video on YouTube how to install that thing. That's it.
exactly.
But the fact that you can see all of that, it's basically on the report, or how much your training helps you to connect those dots,
I
right?
haven't read your report. It's all the training.
It's all the training.
And
Wow.
so for me, a picture tells 1,000 words. I can look at this and I'll instantly have a sense of who I'm talking to. And then to connect this to the self-concept, I'll also instantly have a sense of whether you're in a lot of emotional pain or not. And I've seen people where the self-concept is absolutely flipped from the self. So let me tell you a little bit about your work and the way it's asking you to show up.
Mhm.
For the most part, your work is an incredibly comfortable environment for you because the punchline is that you're being paid to be who you are. At least that's your experience of it. So no one's asking you not to be collaborative. No one's asking you to stop being a people person. No one is asking you to multitask and break china and fight fires. Um, I think sometimes you may feel that you're accessing details even less than you'd like to, and there are times. So what I intuit looking at this is there are times when you're working with less information than you would like, and that it means that you're taking risks that you're not fully comfortable taking yet. That you would like to have a little bit more time to consider all sides of a problem, because that's the other thing I forgot to say about yourself. So one of the things that I see in your pattern, which is actually unique, and this is coming back to yourself, is that you have equal amounts of gas pedal and brakes when it comes to risk. And so for you, with big decisions, they can be hard because you have a unique ability to see every side of a problem. And when people are working through something difficult, you're the guy that they probably ask, and if they're not, they should be, what can go right and what can go wrong here? You see all of that. There's something about your work environment right now that's asking you to make some of those decisions before you get a chance to consider everything that can go right and wrong. And sometimes for you, that just feels like a little bit of a misalignment, but not to a great degree. And I don't think it's stressing you to the point where you're miserable in your work environment.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes,
Does that
absolutely.
sound right?
It sounds really, really right, and that's really translates the moment I'm living, which is a moment I'm having a lot of fun and a lot of joy and pleasure, learning a lot and feeling that I can truly be myself, you know,
Yeah.
at work. So yeah, and so you're referring like the difference also is related to the flexible and the steady ones versus the self concept versus the self.
Yeah,
That's what
so
you see
now
some
let me go
difference.
back. Now that I've read you your results, let me now go back and tell you what I saw to know to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know you're kind of interested in the science of it. So for this A drive, you're a sigma low collaborative, which means that you don't have that drive to be in charge. And that's what I talked about with the right idea versus your idea. You're a highest B, so your highest drive is for extroversion and interaction with other people. That says that you experience the world through other people and through communication more than in any other way. So we talked a lot about that. And generally what happens is people tend to like about themselves whatever their highest expression is. So I'm also a highest B. And the first self-identifier I would use is that I'm a people person, which I think is true of you also. This high C is a really interesting one in the context of business because it's actually quite rare. The business world, especially the more senior you get, is filled with a lot of low Cs. So I like to say a lot of my client organizations are vitamin C deficient. So often leaders who are low A's and high C's have a little bit work to do in finding leaders whose style they want to emulate because it's really uncommon. But it tends to be the sort of quiet from behind servant leaders who are known to be fair and to really consider things that wind up being the leadership role models for people with this pattern. But one of the things that can often happen in PI readouts is that if you have a high C, you somehow wind up feeling that you're not as good as a low C because you're not a multitasker and you're not, constantly driving and working hard. I mean, in our vernacular in business, it's sort of considered better to be driving than steady. However, from my work with clients and from the types of leaders that I've seen and studied, this high C is desperately needed because change and innovation can't happen in organizations if you don't have people who can actually get it done. And so this, to me, when I do some work with private equity companies looking at management teams, and all the time they'll present to me a team of managers where they're all low Cs. And I'm like, great, you're gonna have new ideas right, left, and center. You're gonna come break China and start fires all the time, every day, and no one's gonna be there to get it done. So you're gonna need to find someone that you might perceive as being, a little less aggressive and sort of a little calmer, but that person is going to be the one on your investment team whose judgment you can't live without because nobody else brings what they bring. And so I called that out in your case because it's a really, especially, as you're getting more and more senior, this is a really unique leadership trait that you bring to the people you work with. And then finally on the low D, that's where the details and things come in. But it's not just where all the letters are, it's also how they are in relation to each other. So I look at the widest from each other, and your widest, what we call factor combination, is your B over your D. So you have over 2 sigmas between those things, and that tells me that you have a very informal approach to things, how things have been done in the past, just not interesting to you. You also have a 2 sigma wide B over A, which tells me that you're people-oriented over task-oriented. You have a pretty wide C over A, which is in PI language sort of that responsive. You see what's going on around you and act accordingly instead of doing fire, ready, aim, right? You're ready, aim, fire. And then finally, this C over D means that you are, you have this kind of thing where on the one hand, if it's something that interests you, you're the guy who nails all the processes to get it done. But if the details don't interest you, you don't read the owner's manual, you don't submit your expense report, whatever those things are, because you just don't care. So that's what I was looking at to paint that picture. And I can do that with any factor combination. So there are 17 that tend to show up in human behavior.
Wow.
And it's really powerful. So then just to tell you a little bit about how this works. So this is you, and I'm going to send you this report. PI will generate some language. I haven't even read this. This is computer generated. I'm not interested in what the computer generation says. I would rather tell you what I see, especially in the context of what I know to be true about you. But then you can do this really cool thing, and I'll just go ahead and show you this, where let's say, and I'm going to I'll put this up. So let's say that you're hiring someone, right? And you don't necessarily know a person's pattern, but you do know what kind of person you want for the job. You can come up with a job assessment that says, I don't know who the person is, but I want them to be a high collaborative. I want them to not be extroverted. I want them to be a sort of more thoughtful, introspective type of person. I want them to have that super high patience, and I want them to be very in the details because this is a job that works in safety, and this is the profile you need. So then you have every candidate applying for a job take the predictive index. As you saw, it took 5 or 10 minutes. There's no cognitive information, so there's nothing embarrassing or anything. And you can start matching profiles to this. You can also, and this is one of the things that's really powerful that I like to use with my clients. Let's say that you have a job open like this. You can search your database of current employees to see who might be a match. And I've seen more people get promoted out of roles when they otherwise never would have tripped the radar screen by using this, because people are like, oh my gosh, Daniel has this profile and I had never thought about it because it's 2 job levels up. But what can we do to start grooming Daniel now, because he's the perfect behavioral pattern for it?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yes, it's so, I mean, to me, it's a tool to bring about good, because people feel better and succeed better in their jobs. It's just, it's like, I know it sounds silly, but to me, it's like a gift to the world that this exists.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know we want to do some closure here, but first of all, thank you very much, Leonora. This is fantastic. As I said, guys, I'm not lying to you. For those who are watching here in my YouTube channel that know me, you know that all the things she described is who I am, right? So it's really impressive, and we didn't do any conversations before that. We just opened the recording the minute we joined here. Um, and as you said, there are so many applications of that when you are hiring someone for your company, when you are building a team, right? You say, oh, you know, maybe I need to make some changes in that team and maybe put that person in a different team and make a better combination of diversity and diversity talent. So you can also look at that. So now I'm gonna ask you the question that probably everyone is asking, which is how can someone find you and how can someone reach out to you to develop this predictive index for themselves or for their teams?
Well, thank you so much for asking that question. So the best place is probably my website, which is coachleonora.com. And I'll spell that because if you're Brazilian, my name is easy to spell, but if you're a native English speaker, it's less so. So it's Coach, C-O-A-C-H, Leonora, Leonora.com.
Perfect, perfect. I will add here also a comment in the video so you guys can access Leonora's website. I really appreciate it. This was wonderful. You know, I gotta tell my family, my wife, and say, hey, you know, there's other people in the world now that knows more about myself. You know, probably my wife would agree 100% of all those things.
And it's probably why she loves you so much.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
So Daniel, an offer that I'll make in closing. If you want to send her the same link I send you, she can take it, and I'll send you to a relationship guide that predicts what will be easy in your interactions and what will be harder.
Wow, fantastic, fantastic.
So,
Thank you for that. Let me, do you have time for a quick last question? Because it's
one
really
quick
out of,
last question, yes.
yes, curiosity for me. How do you tell these results to a person that is also looking for change, right? So, which is not my case, but let's say in some points in my career, I struggle with this idea of I gotta be more detailed oriented, right?
Yeah.
I need to do that. I'm too much big picture and all of that. Now I'm in a different mood, but if you have this need for a change, you know, I need to embrace more the extrovert or the detailed oriented. Is it possible to do the change?
So that's a really interesting question. And this morning I was coaching someone where we had this discussion because she said, and we were looking at her predictive index, she said, what I really need to do is change how emotional I get about things. She was looking at her E. And I said, and I use this for myself, and I said, I'd like to offer a different way of thinking about it, which is rather than say you need to change it, examine which parts of that tendency serve you today. So as we looked at it, she was able to say, I connect easily with people, I have strong intuition, and the parts that don't serve me are that I can get really emotionally hooked in things. And so my advice would be for anyone to do that, thank the parts that no longer serve you, and think about going deep into the parts that still do serve you, and look to see where you can get help on the parts that don't come naturally. But Daniel, I'm a coach. You know that. This is how coaches talk and think.
Exactly, exactly, absolutely. We embrace change as well. Fantastic, Leonora. Thank you very much. And
Thank
guys,
you so much for having me on your channel. And I wish everyone a beautiful and happy day.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you.